Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Terry Abstein, and I am the Arts Administrator for the Division of Cultural Affairs. Today's webinar on the Single Audit Act tab feature and the DOS grant system will be led by Chris Orr. Chris is a member of the Division of Cultural Affairs staff and has been instrumental in coordinating and testing the new feature along with members of each division that utilizes the DOS grant system and the IT team. Before I turn the webinar over to Chris, I just wanted to make a few brief remarks. All of you attending today's webinar have seen some variation of the Single Audit Act certification. It might have been a statement that you acknowledged in a recent grant application or in a final report. It might have been as part of a grant closeout requirement, or you may have received an email, or more likely multiple emails from members of staff, me, or even the Inspector General's office requesting that you complete a certification form for previous years. Each division has handled this requirement differently. This new feature is designed to standardize and simplify the process for all of the divisions that utilize the DOS grant system. We thank you all for being patient while we worked through the best way to collect the necessary information to fulfill the Single Audit Act requirement. And with that, I will turn the webinar over to Chris.
Thank you, Terry. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I guess, Terry, you may be the only one speaking. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
To make sure. So as Terry already mentioned, we are very excited here at the division and across the department, really, with our grant user liaison group that put this together to have what we see as a major improvement in the method that we use to collect and comply with the Single Audit Act requirement for all of our grantees. And we really feel like this is going to streamline the process, make it more efficient for everyone involved, our grantees, staff, tracking, and ultimately the Office of the Inspector General as well. So we think it's a good thing for everyone, and we're excited to share it. I may be joined today by other members of the Grants User Liaison Group that help put this together. And if they're on the line today, they can certainly also jump in today to answer any questions that you might have as we go along. So with that in mind, I know that most of you are already familiar with the Florida Single Audit Act and the Federal Single Audit Act requirements for your organizations. And the main goal of today is really to introduce you and familiarize you with the components that we've added to the online grant system. But just very briefly as an overview of what is the FSAA, it's a requirement for any recipient or subrecipients of state funds to have a state single audit conducted if that organization has expended $750,000 or more in state funds during that organization's fiscal year. And so there's a couple key components of this. One is that distinction of expended as opposed to simply received. Also, the distinction of non-state entity in the way that the Single Audit Act requirements are set up. Now, a caveat to that is we've been asked by the Inspector General for our purposes for this compliance supplement within the DOS grant system to ask all of our organizations to at least go through the motions of completing this requirement just to assume that everyone is a non-state entity, whether or not you do need to complete an audit or not. And the other main thing that you'll hear me say many times throughout this presentation is that we're talking about your organization's fiscal year. And so that is the time frame that is used to determine the amount of state or federal funds expended. It's your organization's fiscal year, not the state's fiscal year, which may or may not be the same thing. And so in determining the amount of state financial assistance expended within that fiscal year, the organization is to consider all sources of state financial assistance, whether that be from the Department of State or any other state agency, as well as potentially other non-state entities that have received pass-through funds that are in fact state funds. What it does not include is federal dollars that come directly or as pass-through awards. And so in our case, for the Division of Cultural Affairs, that would include things like the Fast Track grants and the NEA special projects, which are federal pass-through dollars that come from the National Endowment for the Arts. But you may have to report on that for the Federal Single Audit Act requirement. And the Federal Single Audit Act is close, but not quite identical to the State Single Audit Act requirement. The purpose of this compliance requirement really boils down to two things: uniformity and efficiency for everyone. It establishes a uniform state audit requirement for non-state entities receiving state financial assistance. So previously, as many of you may be aware, organizations were required to complete separate audits for each state and federal project. And so now with the Federal Single Audit Act and the State Audit Act requirement, an organization only needs to complete one, hence single audit. These are several resources. Obviously, you can't click on these, but right now these are hyperlinks, but these are available in several places as you go through the process in the DOS grant system, and the program managers will also share these with you after the presentation today. Just several helpful resources as you go about completing this requirement for the State Single Audit Act. We have the website of DFS, Department of Financial Services, with lots of helpful resources there, as well as a very helpful question and answer document put together by the State of Florida Auditor General in 2019. We've also supplied as well a compliance supplement to the Code of Federal Regulations 2 Part 200, the grand circular that governs federal policies over grant making and compliance. And that document is available to you as well. And you'll see these three links appear at several stages as you move through the compliance process in DOS grants, and we'll share those with you as well for your information. So with that, we're going to turn to the actual components in DOS grants and help you familiarize yourself with that. And hopefully you'll see that I think this is going to be simple and streamlined for everyone. So we start by going to your organization's organization details page, which you navigate to by going to the organization tab at the top of DOS grants, and then click on View My Organizations to select your organization of choice. So the new single audit tab is over here on the right. Previously just had these three tabs. And the one crucial thing to note right now is that we don't have notifications going out in the system. This is something that we're working very hard to implement in the system, particularly now that we've launched this new component. And so for these first few months, at least for this year, you won't get notifications when you have a pending certification form or audit due, but we are working to re-implement notifications across the system. And that will hopefully be happening in the next couple of months. So for now, we'll be relying a lot on communication from your grant managers until we get that up and running. So your compliance date is determined by your organization's fiscal year end date, which is located right here on the screen. And once again, this is not the state of Florida's fiscal year end date. Now this date can be edited by going to Edit Organization at the top right. And this date is editable by you until you pass that fiscal year end date, at which point you'll have a pending certification form to complete, and that date will actually be locked. And you'll have to, if you find at that point that it's wrong, you'll have to reach out to your program manager to get that changed. And we actually implemented that because we thought of a scenario where potentially an organization could continually push that date back as a way to avoid ever needing to complete the compliance. But the day after your organization's fiscal year end date passes, a pending record appears here under the Single Audit Act Certification Form Q. So click Edit, and then you'll begin the process to complete the form. Depending on how you answer the form's questions, your organization may be required to complete the audit. And if this is the case, a pending financial report record will appear under the financial report upload queue below. So if that's required, the audit will be due no later than 9 months after your fiscal year end date. And you'll notice that the date for the certification form and the financial report upload are actually the same. They're both 9 months, but it's something to keep in mind that you will probably want to complete the certification form well before that deadline so that you're able to evaluate whether or not you do in fact need to complete an audit before it's due. The organization fiscal year column specifies the fiscal year for which you are completing the form. And once again, that is your fiscal year, not the state's. And that will help you keep track if you have multiple records from the past couple years in that queue. So if you click edit on that certification form that's pending, the edit link will take you into the wizard, which is a series of questions that we've put together that kind of breaks down the components of this form and helps guide the user through to help ensure that everyone answers the form correctly. So on the first page, you are just asked to confirm that fiscal year end date. If it's correct, just check yes and go next. If it's not correct, like I said, at this point, it's actually locked. So you'll be asked to confirm that, yes, this is actually the incorrect date. And at that point, it'll take you back to the organization details page, and you'll have to reach out to your program manager to have that date changed before moving forward. So assuming that date is correct, the next question asks whether your organization is a sub-entity of a larger organization. And the key here for the FSAA is whether or not your organization shares an FEIN number with a larger entity. That's that federal tax ID number. So the most common examples for our grantees could be a museum or an academic department within a larger university or a subunit of a local government like Parks and Rec. So in order to correctly respond to the compliance requirement, it's imperative that you know whether or not your organization shares an FEIN number with a larger entity. And for the purposes of the FSAA and the federal, you're reporting on the expenditures of that entire entity or multiple entities that share that same number. So if you select yes to being part of a larger organization that shares that number, you'll be taken to this page, which gives you a fillable text box that allows you to enter in the name of that larger entity. And the name that you provide here will be the one that actually appears on the certification form. Now, in the event that your organization actually has a parent organization that's already in our system and they're associated with one another so that the system knows and has them connected, that parent organization will actually appear here on this page and ask you to confirm whether or not that is indeed your parent org. This is a fictional relationship that I just made between two of our grantees in the system just for demonstration purposes. But in this scenario, we're saying that Treasure Coast Community Singers is a sub-entity of the University of Florida. So the next page really gets to the heart of the Single Audit Act compliance. 2 questions will ask whether your organization expended $750,000 or more in state or federal funds for the fiscal year in question. So answering yes to either of these questions means that you're required to complete a single audit, whether that be state, federal, or both, and that will trigger a pending financial report upload for you to complete in the system. So as you can see on this page, we have several components here, several pieces of information. You have your organization name or the parent organization, if that's applicable to you, that shares the FEIN number. Here's the FEIN number there, the fiscal year end date that you confirmed, and then the relevant Florida statute and the Grand Circular 2 CFR 200 for the federal code. The next page actually generates the resulting certification form for you to digitally sign and submit, filled in based on your responses to all of the previous questions. So look over this, and if anything appears incorrect, you can just click go back and then navigate back through the certification form wizard again and change anything that you need. So in this example, the resulting form shows that we've selected that our organization does not share an FEIN with a larger entity. that we have exceeded the $750,000 threshold for state funds and federal funds, which means we need to complete an audit. Then after that, you just check the certification box, enter your digital signature, confirm, and submit. So just for demonstration purposes again, here's what the form would look like if you had selected yes to being part of a sub-entity, or excuse me, to being a sub-entity that's part of a larger parent organization. Notice that your organization name appears in the first statement. I hereby certify that Treasure Coast Community Singers does share an FEIN with a larger entity, University of Florida. And then the following expenditure statements pertaining to the Single Audit Act refer to that parent org, University of Florida. So after submitting, you'll be taken back to the organization details page again. And as you can see, that status of the 2020 certification form record has been updated from preparing to submitted, and the edit link has changed to view. Because we answered yes to meeting the $750,000 threshold, a pending record has now appeared under that financial report upload queue, along with that same due date of 9 months after the fiscal year end date. So if you click edit on that pending financial upload, this takes you to the submission page, and here's where you can actually upload that audit. This is very similar to other upload tools in DOS Grants. It shouldn't be anything too complicated, but to add a file, first you can click add new file here, and then click select file to select one from your computer. Make sure you hit that update button, otherwise it won't actually upload. And then you can either submit then and there, or you can save and come back and work on it again, but you actually have to submit. Click submit at the bottom for it to submit to the Inspector General. You're able to add multiple files here as needed and delete them. Now to go back to our earlier example where I connected Treasure Coast Community Singers as a sub-entity of UF. In this scenario, let's say that the University of Florida has already submitted their Florida Single Audit Report in the DOS Grant system. And now the sub-entity is going in to complete theirs. And because UF is already finished, their audit report is automatically uploaded here on Treasure Coast Community Singers submission page. And so as the sub-entity, you still have the option of keeping this report and using it for your own submission, or you can delete it and upload something different. You can also leave it there and upload additional documents as needed. So now that you've submitted, you'll be taken back again to the details page, and you'll see both the certification form and the upload report in submitted status. And this completes your reporting requirements for Single Audit Act compliance. Now, this is where the notifications will be very helpful, and we're working hard on that to make them active. But once the Office of Inspector General reviews your submission, they will either change the status to reviewed, meaning that no further action is necessary, or they'll return one or both of the elements with comments and change the status to returned. They can return both. They could return just the audit, meaning that there was a mistake in the audit upload. Or they could return the certification form, which means that you answered that incorrectly. Either you said yes and they think you actually didn't meet the threshold, or you said you didn't and they come back and say that you actually do meet the threshold and need to complete an audit. So you can always access your completed submission by clicking on the view links under the certification form and the report upload column, and they take you to the same place. It's just an embedded PDF like this, and you can download that for your reference at any time. It has the certification form, and then underneath that, the financial report upload, if you have uploaded that. And you can see a few different elements here on the PDF. It shows the grant numbers that correspond to that fiscal year that are contributing to that total amount expended within that time frame. Shows the organization's fiscal year end date, organization name, and the submission date. Once the IG changes your submission to either returned or reviewed status, you'll be able to view any comments left by the IG by clicking on the view link under that review column. And once again, both of those links go to the same place. This shows you the same embedded PDF, only now you have this left-hand panel, whoops, excuse me, which shows you both comments left by the IG as well as any uploaded documents to accompany those comments. And as you can see here, they have the option when they review these to either set the submission as reviewed, which means that everything looks okay, or they have the option of returning one or both of these. It's the same page that they see, except you can't edit anything. It's a view only. So that completes our overview of these new components in the system. Once again, we will share these additional resources with you after the presentation. And at this point, we'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. And I welcome also any fellow staff that's here or other representatives from the liaison group to jump in as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, very much for that. I hope everyone finds that helpful. It really is meant to be as super easy as possible. I've been answering questions as we've been going along, and it seems that we have sort of the same question, just asked in different ways. So to be very, very clear, everyone who receives funding from the Department of State is required to complete this certification. It is a Department of State requirement from the Inspector General's office. So whether or not you've reached the threshold, you do have to do the certification. And then if you have reached the threshold and you have expended $750,000, that is when you would have to have an audit performed and submitted. But the certification is very simple. It will take you 3 minutes, but it is a requirement for absolutely everyone who receives funding for us. And then I had another question, and I have a sort of answer for you. Someone asked whether this requirement applies to PPP loans funds, and we did have this question back in November from one of our grantees, and we directed it to the Inspector General's office, and their response was that the Office of Management and Budget has provided some guidance to recipients of the loans, but that you should contact the person who would be doing the audit or your CPA firm for a more solid answer about that we were not to answer that question directly, since we don't have anything to do with the PPP funds. So in a roundabout way, there is an answer to that question. Someone is asking what financial documents we should upload. So if you have reached the $750,000 threshold, you have expended that during your fiscal year, you would have to have a single audit completed by an outside auditor, and that is what you would submit. If you have not reached that threshold, all you have to do is complete the certification form. If we had a grant for $1,000 and spend all $1,000, do we answer yes or no to expend? So no, if you only received $1,000 from state funds or federal funds, you did not reach the $750,000 threshold. And for the Division of Cultural Affairs, 99% of our grantees will not have reached that threshold, because we have a lot of smaller organizations that aren't receiving additional funds. Is the capability out there right now to take care of this certification, like right after this webinar? Yes, absolutely. The feature is live in the system, and as of yesterday afternoon, we already had 150 or 180 organizations already completed. It's working. We haven't had any complaints. So yes, please do jump right on there and fill it out and get it off of your checklist. What question would we ask the auditor specifically regarding Department of State grants? So basically they're going to add up all of the funds that you have spent for your fiscal year and tell you whether it's more or less than $750,000. Chances are you won't need them to tell you that. When I referred you to asking your CPA or the auditor, that was in regards to any PPP loans that you might have received as part of the CARES Act. That is just something that we haven't dealt with. It isn't in our purview, and so the Inspector General just advised that you seek outside assistance. Is there a list of state funding sources that count toward the $750,000? There is not a list, but it would include things like from the Department of Education, the Department of Environmental Protection. So any state agency, not just the Department of State, any state agency that you might have received funding from is included in that list. Oh, Stephanie Martino just said she submitted and it's a good system. Thank you. That's really great to hear. We're happy to know that is working. We did work very, very hard. Someone else. Monica, I will talk with you offline about your PPP funds, see if we can come to some sort of resolution or find some good information for you. I'll email you afterwards. What else do we have here? If our organization hasn't had a single audit completed, but our report is due on March 30th, what should our organization do? If you are required to do the single audit because you have expended more than $750,000 and your due date is March 30th, try to get it done by March 30th or as close to it as you can, because the Office of the Inspector General is checking that queue daily to make sure, and they are checking everyone off. So as soon as you can get it done, that would be great. For a June 30th fiscal year end is the first certification for 6/30/2020. The first certification, so yes, that's a very good question. The certifications are for your 2020 fiscal year. That's what you would be answering now. That is what is live in the system. So if your last completed fiscal year was June 30th of 2020, then you would need to make sure that you complete your certification by March 30th of 2021. So we went back a little bit to capture last year's fiscal year so that we could meet the requirements for the Auditor General's office. And let's see, it looks like I have one more question. We are a public radio station and receive E&G state appropriation funds from our university. Does that count? So yes, it does count. And technically, since you are falling in underneath the university's FEIN number, you would be answering the questions as if the university was answering the questions. It would include any funds that the university receives from state or federal sources. In most cases, universities would have to submit a single audit. So you might want to check with someone at your foundation or in the finance office to find out how they would answer those questions and what their process is for doing their audit. And some additional clarification about the PPP funds. and what you're supposed to ask the CPA. That is what you would ask the CPA. I received this many dollars in PPP loan funds. Does that count towards the Single Audit Act requirement? And your accountant will know what this Florida Single Audit Act and the Federal Single Audit Act is. They should be able to clarify that for you, because I'm sure they're getting a lot of questions about it. Okay, and I see someone has given us some more clarification. The AICPA Governmental Audit Quality Center recently released guidance indicating PPP loan funds will not need to adhere to uniform guidance single audit requirements. However, they may still be subject to an SBA audit if funds were in excess of $2 million. So that is a handy piece of information, and you can go to the internet and look up the AICPA Governmental Audit Quality Center and see what information they have. Let's see. Someone says that their institution received a daily memo for their audit. Should we upload the memo? Oh, a delay memo. I'm sorry, not a daily. Yes, actually, if you would submit that delay memo for the audit, that would be helpful. Essentially, I believe what will happen is the Inspector General's office will see that and then return it to you so that you can upload the audit when you have it, or at least that would be my interpretation of it. We haven't seen one of those yet, as it is, it's very, very new. And can we get a link to the webinar in case you were recording? Yes, we are recording. To access it is actually the same link as the registration that you used to connect with the webinar, and we will send out a follow-up email with the link to the recording and a copy of the presentation materials to everyone who has registered. I think that I have answered all the questions that were on here. If you're still confused, please do feel free to reach out to your program manager for your grant. You can contact me. My name is Terry Abstein. My contact information is on the website for the Division of Cultural Affairs. We really did want to make this as easy as possible, and so hopefully you will find that to be true. And that did not take us very long at all. We are at 10:35 and seeing no other additional questions. I believe that we will close the webinar for the day. Thank you very much for joining us, and let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, everyone.